Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We're so glad you're here. Okay, it is 12:03, so we will go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Untersea. I am the School Family and Community Engagement Consultant here at Region 10. We also have Jim Wright with us today from Partners Resource Network, and the two of us are so happy to host today's webinar. We have Lorna Salgado with us today. She is an Inclusive Services Consultant here at Region 10. And she is going to be sharing information today on IEP implementation and monitoring, tips for parents. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Region 10 website. I will send that information out to all of the people that registered for today's webinar. And while Lorna is talking, we will put links in the chat to today's slide deck in case that is helpful for anyone to be able to follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lorna. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jim. It's great to be with you guys. Well, I love this topic of IEP implementation and monitoring for parents because I think it's great. I'm Lorna. I work at Region 10, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. She's going to put this in the chat, but you can access the slides so that you have them if you would like them. There is the bit.ly for it. It is case sensitive. So the IEP has to be capitalized and implement, hopefully I spelled that correctly, is not capitalized. So there you go. I'm glad you're here. So let's talk about the IEP implementation. I have to move things around on my screen. There we go. Let's talk about the purpose of this today. It's to deliver the services and supports that are outlined in your child's IEP and to ensure that these supports and services are implemented correctly. And the truth is, it takes everyone to do an IEP and make sure that everything is correct in it. So let's start. I always start on the legal end. So let's do a little legalese right now. So the federal law that mandates special education is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or sometimes called IDEA or IDEA. It says a couple of things. It says that we have to have an IEP that's in effect before those special education or special ed and related services can be provided, that we have to implement it as quickly as possible after a meeting, and that we have to have accessible to each regular ed teacher, special ed teacher, and related service provider who's responsible. So that means not just the people that might be sitting in the meeting, but anyone who's going to work with your child needs to have access to that. It also lets us know that each teacher or related service provider has to be informed of what's their responsibility. So we have to make sure that people that are going to be working with your child not only have access to, but know what's my job in the IEP. So if I'm the speech therapist, what was said? Or if I'm the OT, what was said, the occupational therapist. So it also has to tell us what accommodations, modifications, and supports have to be provided for the child in accordance with the IEP. So that's kind of the legal end of what has to be in there. And then let's talk about your role as a parent. So I love this is a happy picture, but it talks about how parents should be meaningfully involved in the IEP process. And a lot of parents go, yes, I was meaningfully involved in the meeting. But remember that the IEP is a process. It starts with a meeting once a year and it culminates with the next one the next year. But it includes everything in the process. It includes implementing that IEP. So we want to make sure that we're going to give you ways not just to participate in the meeting, which is important, but also how do I follow up? What do I need to know about the IEP from meeting to meeting? And the first thing I started with was remember that our IEP placement is determined by the needs in the IEP and not by the disability. So every kid with dyslexia doesn't get XYZ, and every kid with autism doesn't get this, or every child with an intellectual disability doesn't go to a self contained program. Or so all of those things. Remember that there really is an I in IEP and it's individual and it's about your child's individual needs. And so that's how each of those meetings should be approached. So, how are we involved then? If we know we want to go to the meeting, we know we ask questions in the meeting, but how do I get involved with the rest of it? So, I've got several ideas for you on these few slides that we're going to kind of briefly go over for you. The first one is understanding what services your child should receive. So, there's a page of your IEP. A lot of times we call it the schedule of services or something like that. But there's something that has frequency and duration. It says, how often does this service happen? So maybe a child gets special education support in a general ed classroom. It talks about how often that's going to happen. Or my example here was, does the child go to speech twice a week for 30 minutes? That's how often, twice a week. And how long are they there? 30 minutes. Um, the other thing you might want to do is find out when does that happen. So a lot of times it will say, you know, if a child gets support, it'll say it's in English language arts and they're getting this support 5 days a week for 30 minutes or something like that. So it lets you know how often, where, and then also where it's going to happen, that location. That's that bottom one. Where does the service take place? And we'll talk more about that. But notice that I've put on here, if your child can communicate with you about it, always ask them, like if they go to speech, ask them what they did there. If they can't tell you, that's a good time to call that speech therapist and say, hey, I'm asking about this and I'm not able to know what you're talking about. Can you help me? Because your goal is to ultimately follow through with that at home. If they're working on something specific, like in speech, they're working on telling the main idea of the story, then when we're watching a show on television, maybe we're going to ask questions in the same way, about the characters and things like that. So it really helps you to really bring school home and let home go to school so that we can really bridge those gaps for your child. The other thing need to know is in some of that scheduling is who's responsible for the service. Is it the general ed teacher that's going to be providing something, a special ed teacher, a therapist, a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, adaptive PE, music therapist, whatever it might be? Who is it that's responsible for each service that they talk about? And then did you know that frequency and duration? And then where it takes place. Is it take place in general ed? Does it take place in special ed class? Is it a tutoring time? Does it take place in speech therapy? Does the PT come during class or do they come during PE? That's the kind of things that we want to know. So those are great questions for you to ask. Even though it might be kind of listed on the paperwork, having that clear for you can really help you understand, where is my child receiving support during the day? The next thing I had in here is check in. You don't have, just because we have IEP meetings, or in Texas, we call them ARD meetings, just because we have these meetings once a year and you get IEP progress reports as often as report cards go home, that doesn't mean that you can't check in with a case manager. If you're seeing things coming home or things that don't make sense or concerns that you have, like, hey, all this homework's coming and my child's having a meltdown and it's taking us 3 hours to do at night. Man, I would be calling that teacher to talk about that so that we can adjust and maybe make changes that might need to be made. So if you're seeing concerns, you don't have to wait for a meeting. You can call and check in. Everything doesn't have to be in a formal meeting. We can call and say, hey, here's some things I'm seeing. Um, Remember that all communication is important, but it doesn't all have to take place in a meeting. So don't feel like I have to wait for meetings to ask my questions or share my concerns. You can do that anyway. Sometimes we might need to make changes that require a meeting, but you should always be sharing your concerns. And then I said, read and keep copies of communication that's sent home. If you get things like behavior charts or progress reports or even emails, the best thing to do as a parent is have a folder, whether that's an electronic folder, a physical folder, or one of each, but have something so that you sort of know, where do I keep things? Some of you have more than one student who receives special education services. And in that case, you'd want to make sure I knew one mom that had color codes and she would code things as they came in so she knew which child it went with, and that's the folder that they would go in so that she could keep up with it, so that if something comes up you always have that documentation and feeling good about the communication that you have, or lack of, knowing that there's a lack of if there is. The next one is read between the lines. Yes, there's meetings, but always watch those grades. Usually there's a website where you can check grades, check them, check homework, ask about testing scores. I'm not just talking about things like star scores or TELPAS scores, things that are statewide. I'm talking about things that are maybe sometimes they'll call them MAP testing or other test scores that you want to know about. Um, Ask questions. Maybe it's, where was my child's reading level? If that's not clear to you, the progress they're making and where they are, it doesn't have to be, I can only ask about an IEP goal. I can ask lots of things. Um, if it's possible to ask your child or have your child communicate with you in their preferred mode, ask them about getting their accommodations. So on the IEP, there are accommodations listed. There's accommodations for the class. If they're in a testing grade, there might be accommodations for state assessments. And I think it's great for parents to say, first of all, talk to your kids about what their accommodations are. Teachers should be doing that as well. We want to make sure that our kids know, oh, I have things read to me. Maybe I have dyslexia and I have things read because that helps me to understand and not get frustrated because things went more quickly. And then ask your child, hey, how was this read to you? Was it computer? Was it a teacher? So that you're seeing not just what teachers say, but you're hearing from your child about how that happens if your child's able. Jot down any concerns your child communicates and then share that. Um, if your child says, well, yeah, I'm supposed to have, the math chart or whatever, but nobody's been giving it to me, jot that down and share it. Let's not wait until everybody's in tears over it and we've had a big meltdown. Just say, hey, I was checking on this. This is what my child says. Can you talk to me about how that is going down in class? Because sometimes maybe the child's not aware of how something looks, or sometimes, let's just be honest, the teacher forgot and we need to remind them that's part of the IEP and it must be done. And then I think this one's super important. Use positive words about the school and the school staff in front of your child. Now, I'm not saying if you're unhappy, you can't use non-positive words, but please don't do it in front of your child. They pick up on it. Even if they're nonverbal, they hear what you say. So you always want to, the child sometimes can feel in between, like I want to please my parent and I want to please my teacher, but they're at war. And that's a really tough place to put a child in. So just as we would say to teachers, use positive words about kids and their families, we want to say to families, use positive words about the school in front of your child, even if it's, yeah, I'm going to talk to Miss Jones about that. It sounds like you weren't getting it. Yeah, we'll talk about it. That's still positive. That's not saying I knew Miss Jones wasn't doing that. So just make sure that we're using those positive words because it's best for your child. If you don't understand something, you have every right to ask. And it's okay if you asked once before and still don't understand. That's their job to make sure that you understand. So what does that accommodation look like in the classroom? So maybe we wrote they get supplemental aids for science, or maybe we wrote they get oral administration. What does that look like? Does that look like computer? Does that look like someone reads to them? Do we record it with a human voice? Are we using a screen reader? Those are great questions to ask because an accommodation on the IEP may be able to be carried out multiple ways, but you kind of want to know, how does that look for my child? Um, Another question you can ask is to, excuse me, ask them about the assistive technology the child uses. Are they using a screen reader? Do they use, I don't know, some of our kids use speech to text or text to speech, or there might be other technology your child is using in the classroom to help them communicate, complete their work. Those are things you want to ask. And then always ask the teacher, how are the accommodations working? So one tip that we always tell teachers about accommodations is accommodations aren't it's not a candy store. We don't look at accommodations and go, that's a good idea. Yeah, we should use all those. Those all sound great. The accommodations we should be putting on the IEP are ones that are known and proven beneficial for your child. So unless we know that it benefits your child, we should just be trying it out, not putting it on the IEP as an accommodation. The ones that we know your child must have, that's what we should be putting on an IEP. So sometimes teachers need to try things. Hey, I'm going to try these couple of things and see if it benefits your kiddo. Ask those questions. Even the ones that are on the IEP, ask how they're working. Those are great questions to ask at teacher conferences or open houses. How are the accommodations working? You know, is my child using it routinely, independently, and effectively, or is it something that you provide? Those are great things to ask of your teachers. I know that sometimes we have some educators join us, so I added a couple of little pages about things that our educators need to know. And hey, if you're a parent, you're welcome to share these with educators at the campus as well. Anytime that parents wonder about supports and services, sit down and explain it if you're an educator. I always have to remember that I speak special ed, I speak acronyms, I speak IEP. I should have a little button that says I speak fluent IEP. But a lot of times educators, because they live in the world, forget that parents might not speak fluent IEP. Parents, be patient. Some of you have spoken fluent IEP for years, and you might have a brand new educator who might have something to learn from you too about the IEP or things that work well for your child or how something was implemented in the past. Identify the processes with which you're going to monitor those. And I even like teachers should have some kind of a log, some kind of a tracking sheet. There's no one way it has to be done. So you might ask the teacher, how do you keep track? Some teachers put it on their lesson plans. They put the initials of the kid and what they provided for accommodations. So just see what kinds of things are out there. I added, a tracking sheet that some people use. Make sure that data is being collected to monitor progress towards meeting the IEP goals. And you should know that because parents, every grading period, you should be getting IEP goal progress reports. That means that they're telling you, where is your child in relation to their annual goals? How is that working? And then educators ensure that any training is conducted for staff. So if we have a general ed teacher who needs some kind of training to work with maybe a screen reader or something like that, make sure that we've trained those people. Parents, you can ask in an ARD, how is everyone going to be trained to implement these things that we've decided for my kiddo? And then adhere to timelines, of course, if you're a staff member. The IDEA, our federal law, states that every child's IEP has to contain these things. It has to say how the progress towards meeting annual goals will be measured and when those reports, progress reports towards those goals are provided to parents. So those are things we know are in federal law, and that's why we progress monitor. And it has to be through some kind of periodic report. Most of our districts do it with the issuance of report cards because that's easiest. Whenever report cards go home, we get IEP progress monitoring. All students receiving special education have to have annual goals. No one can have nothing. Now, we do have some folks Some of our kiddos are in high school and they might only have one goal in the IEP left, and it might not be academic, right? Some goals have to do with academics. Some goals are what we call functional in nature. And that means that it could be behavioral, it could be social, it could be for, like I said, some kids left in high school, it could be about transition, how we get them on to the next step after high school. Um, Goals are based on something in the IEP called the PLAF, the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. So that's actually a page in your IEP. And it talks about what can the kiddo do right now. So we base goals on that. So IEP goals should always be based on what do we know about our child right now and what they can do, and what do we project that they should be able to do within 1 year. So our IEP teams in Texas, our ARD committees, have to decide how this progress is going to be measured and how often progress towards mastery of the goals are reported through the year. And in Texas, we notify it report cards. Questions parents should ask about monitoring. How is my child's progress measured? When is it measured? And how well will the child need to perform in order to achieve that IEP goal? So kind of some of the things that I say about that is, how are we going to measure it? We know we're going to get it at least as often as report cards, but do we know the criteria? Is it that they need to, if they're learning vowel sounds, do they need to know them at all those short vowel sounds at 90%? Some things might be 100%. I'm going to be able to name all letters at 100%. Some things might be less. We could say that we're going to start work within 1 minute of teacher direction, and that might only be 50% of the time. Or it might be we do something in, I'm going to think speech. We can say certain words with a medial R sound in 6 out of 10 opportunities. So you kind of need to know those things with progress measuring. One thing that I like to do, the picture helps me, and it's lunchtime, so it makes me happy. And that is to talk about what's the difference between grades and IEP progress monitoring. So grades are the whole curriculum. IEP goals are those things that we say that's the critical targeted skill for your child that we're going to focus on. That's the most critical thing. So so the taco picture is on purpose. Grades are the whole taco. It's everything your child does all day. IEP progress are pieces of that. It's the meat or the lettuce. So that's IEP progress are a targeted piece of that curriculum if we're talking about academics. We also remember have lots of goals that are functional. Might be about behavior, might be about socialization, self-help skills, things like that. Those are also parts of what we're teaching the child, but those IEP progress things could be things that are also graded, but that's why we have them separately, because they're the most important thing for your child, whereas grades are the whole taco. So hopefully that little visual helps you a little bit with why do I get both and what's the difference. All right. For educators, if you're out there, take that IEP goal data regularly. Don't just wait till the end and go, I hope they made it. Communicate with the parent and other school staff members. If we think a student has met the target, like they have an IEP annual goal. I just had their IEP meeting in September. Here we are in November, and I'm looking at it and they are meeting it. Like, we've got it. Then we probably need to come back to committee and we need to talk about changing goals or updating that goal in some way. The other thing is, what happens if we set a goal and that child isn't going to make it? We are looking at it going, there's no way. The aim line is too high. I say that's just like doctors when they prescribe medicine. They prescribe medicine based on your age, your weight, your presenting problem, all these things that they choose for you. And sometimes the initial dosage that they prescribe needs to be adjusted. Well, sometimes the same thing happens for IEP goals. Sometimes what we think is going to work needs to be adjusted. And we all need to give ourselves grace. Parents, we need to give teachers grace. Teachers, you need to give yourself grace that sometimes what we thought might not work. Either the child's going to reach it too quickly or they're not going to get there. And so we want to make sure that we know that we can always go back and amend IEP goals. That's okay. Actually, it doesn't show poor planning on our part. It really shows that we're watching the student and their progress and really monitoring. And if we needed to change, that we're adjusting. And that's really okay because it shows how much we're watching our kiddos. If a student isn't progressing, then we need to look at it and problem solve solutions. Do we change the supports the kid is getting, the targets of the goal? Do we totally move to a different goal? Do we add accommodations? Do we add supports? Those are good questions when kids aren't making progress on their IEP goals. All right, I think I finished with about 5 minutes left.
Yes,
So
that was
Sarah,
perfect.
I little time, right? So you
Yes.
want to give
So
me what's
that's what
in
I
the
was
chat?
just going to tell everyone. I'll read a couple of the questions that we've gotten. We're probably not going to have time for all of them. So what I'll do right before we wrap up is I'm also going to put the information for both SpedTechs and Partners Resource Network into the chat, because if we don't have time to get to your questions today, those are great resources to turn to. So Lorna, one of the questions we have is, who would you say would be the go-to person for questions about how the child may be progressing? Where would be the first line of support there?
So, that's a good, whoever asked that, I'm totally going to add that next year to this session because that's a great question. So the first person you're going to go to, most kids have somebody that is called their case manager. And because a lot of your kids have multiple educators that work with them, but somebody is sort of responsible for making sure that that paperwork is updated. So I would ask your child's special education teacher, who is the case manager? If that person is not somebody you want to ask, call the campus administrator and say, who's the case manager? Who would I talk to? So it's typically the special education teacher, unless it's something very specific. If it's very specific for the speech therapist, just call the speech therapist. But typically the first person that you're going to look at is that case manager or the special education teacher.
Okay. Another question was about accommodations. Actually, I had two questions about accommodations.
Okay.
So the first question is, do accommodations have to be implemented at all times, or can parents and teachers kind of specify in the description about how and when accommodations are to be implemented?
Another great question. So accommodations, if it's in the IEP, it should happen. It should be routine. The thing is, you have to allow for a little bit of teacher work with that, because sometimes the accommodation might be to give the child a multiplication chart, but I'm not giving you anything with multiplication. So why do I need to give you a chart today? Right. So we do have to allow that. But typically, if we're asking for an accommodation, it should be all the time. Now, here's the trick to that. Sometimes teachers need to pull that accommodation away to collect data to show that that accommodation is necessary. For example, let's take a child with dyslexia and oral administration. I'm always reading things to you. Once in a while, I'd like to see how you do on your own so that I can compare that data. Now, what they shouldn't do is take grades and things when they haven't given you that accommodation. So that would be there. And then there was something else you asked about accommodations. I forgot that one.
I'm trying to look back through, but while we're doing that, let me ask this one because I know this is a really good, relevant
Oh,
question. And
and
this
let me
is,
say, someone said, can we, you said, can we specify in the description how it can be implemented?
yes.
Because we've said things like, they will get this on writing assignments that are more than 2 paragraphs or reading assignments that are long. So there are times when you can, that's the beauty of the committee, is you guys can decide. What else did you have?
Okay. Do we have to come back to ARD to present new goals?
Ooh, so no, there's something called an amendment process, and it means the IEP is still in place, but amendments mean we don't need to get everybody to sit around. But the way it looks in our legal framework is it says you have to have the key stakeholders. So that's basically the parent, the administrator, someone from special ed, general ed. Those people would have to say, hey, we all agree to this. And then it's really parents saying, so what it shouldn't be is the school telling you this is how it's going to be. It should still be a conversation of, hey, this is what we've noticed from our data. This is what we're proposing. How you feeling about this, mom? Mom says, great, I think that's good. Or, hey, what if we did it this way? And the school says, yep, that sounds good. Then you actually just sign off. We agree that that amendment is there and we can implement it. Now, ARD amendments are allowed in Texas, but we do have some districts that choose not to. They always want to go to an ARD meeting, and that's also acceptable. But I just wanted you to know amendments are okay for them to call you and change it. Good question.
Okay, we are right at 12:30. So I know
Okay.
we had questions we didn't get to. I did drop in the chat the links to both the SpedTech's website and also the Partners Resource Network website. Contact information for both of those organizations is available on those websites, and those are great places to go if you have questions that we weren't able to answer during today's meeting. Really quickly, before we wrap up, I do just want to share that our next family webinar will be on December 6th, and our topic is the Texas Transition and Employment Guide. So we would love to see you again in December. I am going to put that link into the chat as well. And then, Lorna, I'll let you just finish up by sharing the resources that you have.
That's all I had. If you had the in the chat is the link to those. So there's some great things for you. Thank you guys for what you do for your children and how you support schools. And I just wish you the best.
Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it.